Today I am going to report about symbolic convergence theory by Ernest Borman. First, we need to know what this theory is all about. So, symbolic convergence means two or more private symbol worlds inclined toward each other, come more closely together, or even overlap. In other words, group consciousness or cohesiveness. This is a communication theory developed by Ernest Borman, proposing that the holding of fantasies in common transforms collections of individuals into cohesive groups. Borman set forth the central explanatory principle of symbolic convergence theory, which is sharing group fantasies creates symbolic convergence. So in the next slide, an illustration of this principle taken from the book is presented, which can further give you an idea about how symbolic convergence is evident when a group of people share fantasies. Cabin 8 was the rustic, rundown cabin that my group of passage students was assigned to live in for the week. My co-leader and I decked the cabin out with decorations by hanging Christmas lights and origami doves. Yet there was no escaping the massive holes in the screens, sticky messes in the drawers, and the spiders residing in the wrappers. The night students arrived, we walked our group of girls past the brand new cabins, arrived at our old cabin, and presented Cabin 8 their home for a week. Needless to say, they were less than pleased. The next day, as our group was trekking to our morning activity, one of the girls brought up what she thought the perfect cabin would look like. Others jumped in with their ideas. For 10 minutes, each girl contributed something to the discussion of the fantasy cabin. Hot tubs, screened-in porches, soft carpet, lounge chairs, and a glass roof for stargazing were all mentioned as features in their ideal cabin. Looking back on this experience, I see how this shared fantasy played a role in our cabin bonding. As the week went on, our dream cabin became a running joke within our group that helped students develop a sense of closeness, what they deemed hardcoreness. While living in the crummy cabin, they frequently revisited the image of the ideal cabin they created in their conversation. Dramatizing message. So this is the imaginative language by a group member describing past, future, or outside events, creative interpretations of there and then. A dramatizing message is one that contains imaginative language such as a pun or other wordplay, double entendre, figure of speech such as metaphor, simile, personification, analogy, anecdote, allegory, fable, narrative, or other creative expression of ideas. Whatever the form, the dramatizing message describes events occurring somewhere else or at some time other than the here and now. We must also remember some points in order to consider a message as dramatizing. So notice first that a group member's words must paint a picture or call to mind an image in order to be labeled a dramatizing message. Second, a vivid message would qualify as dramatizing if it either describes something outside the group or portrays an event that has happened within the group in the past or might happen to the group in the future. Comments that have no imagery or those that refer to what's currently going on in the group make up the bulk of most group discussions. They aren't dramatizing messages. Going back to the narrative presented in the previous slide, when the girls started to verbally construct their ideal cabin, they were using imaginative language to talk about what they'd like to see in the future, probably wishing it would magically appear that night. If in a darker tone, one of the girls expressed her hope that someone would set fire to the cabin before they returned, that message would also be dramatizing. But if the group of girls sat around in the cabin, grousing about the spiders, mosquitoes, and sticky goo in the drawers, those comments would be about the here and now and wouldn't be defined as dramatizing messages. In symbolic convergence theory, fantasy refers to dramatizing messages that are enthusiastically embraced by the whole group. while the fantasy chain is a symbolic explosion of lively agreement within a group in response to a member's dramatizing message. As Borman noted, some dramatizing messages cause a symbolic explosion in the form of a chain reaction in which members join in until the entire group comes alive. He described what he had seen when a fantasy chains out in this way. The tempo of the conversation would pick up, people would grow excited, interrupt one another, blush, laugh, forget their self-consciousness. The tone of the meeting, often quite intense immediately prior to the dramatizing, would become lively, animated, and boisterous. The chaining process involving both the verbal and nonverbal communication, indicating participation in the drama. So this description of particular situation is an example of how dramatizing messages can create a symbolic explosion which manifests through a chain reaction. As you can notice with the description, the members of the group became overwhelmed with the discussion and would participate until it reaches the point where cohesiveness is apparent within the group. Think of a fantasy theme as the content of the dramatizing message that successfully sparks a fantasy chain. As such, it is the theory's basic unit of analysis. So fantasy themes reflect and create the group's culture. The meanings, emotions, motives, and actions are apparent in fantasy themes. Fantasy themes are indexed by a symbolic cue. So symbolic cue is an agreed upon trigger that sets off group members to respond as they did when they first shared the fantasy. It could be a code word, nonverbal gesture, phrase, slogan, inside joke, bumper sticker, or any shorthand way of re-establishing the full force of shared fantasy. On the other hand, the meaning of a given fantasy theme is quite specific because clusters of related fantasy themes sometimes surface again and again in different groups. The term fantasy type is used to describe these well-worn symbolic paths. Now I will present a video about symbolic convergence theory in order to make the terms more understandable. In the previous slides, the description and illustration of symbolic convergence theory has focused on shared fantasies in small group settings. On the other hand, Borman coined the term rhetorical vision to designate a composite drama that catches up large groups of people into a common symbolic reality, and the wide-ranging body of people who share that reality are called rhetorical community. A procedure called fantasy theme analysis is used to discover fantasy themes and rhetorical visions that have already been created. So these are the four features that are present in all rhetorical visions. Characters. Are there heroes to root for and villains to despise? Plotlines. Do characters act in a way consistent with the rhetorical vision? Scene. How do descriptions of time and place increase the drama's impact? Sanctioning agent. Who or what legitimates the rhetorical vision? In the book, there is an example of a fantasy theme analysis of a pro-eating disorder website where those who resist recovery can anonymously interact with like-minded others. So across the message boards, members personify their disorders as characters in an ongoing drama. Members depict their own goals, struggles, and emotions through the personification of Anna and Mia. Anorexia and bulimia are given life and attributed human-like emotions and qualities which are justified by the sanctioning agent humor. The most favorable depiction is a girl named Anna, or anorexia, who represents the goal of the group, the idealization of perfection in this reality. Perfection is about having self-control and being thin. Personified through Anna is a yearning for being untouchable and perfect. Message board users write about Anna as their hero. Unlike Anna, Mia or bulimia isn't seen as perfect. Her role in the drama is to stir up the emotions users feel as they struggle to get down to the elusive perfect weight. Site users rarely describe Mia in positive terms. The third character in this ongoing drama is the villainous ED, or eating disorder, which represents the social norm of moderation and recovery from addiction. Members avoid the character of eating disorder because they fear recovery, and accepting the eating disorder would lead to a loss of community and a re-entry into a reality in which eating disorders are a negative attribute. Plotlines. First is acting in multiple ways to reduce weight, such as dieting, exercising, and purging. The second plot is doing whatever one has to do to keep the extent of this obsession with food a secret from those who don't share it. Scene. The struggle in the real world wherein their beliefs are challenged. Sanctioning agent. Humor. The sanctioning agent, which is humor, makes the constructed reality legitimate for site users since the satirical exchange of experiences turns discussion of a deadly disease into a game that validates what these users are doing, saying, and living. The rhetorical vision shared by this group is the effort to maintain a disease within settings where their belief is challenged and get back to the state where the personification of the disease can proliferate. An individual may share rhetorical visions providing social realities such as hobbies, politics, intimate relationships, and religion. Those who accept and participate in a particular rhetorical vision comprise its rhetorical community. When an individual accepts a rhetorical vision, it will lead to the adoption of a certain lifestyle or to take action. For example, the born-again Christian is baptized and adopts a lifestyle and behavior modeled after the heroes of the dramas that sustain that vision. As you've gained an understanding of symbolic convergence theory, you've probably thought about its implications for a group in which you take part. No matter what your role in the group, Borman offered the following advice. When the group begins to share a drama that in your opinion would contribute to a healthy culture, you should pick up the drama and feed the chain. If the fantasies are destructive, creating group paranoia or depression, cut the chain off whenever possible. To build cohesiveness, use personification to identify your group. Be sure to encourage the sharing of dramas depicting your group story early in your meetings. Remember that a conscious rhetorical effort on your part can succeed in igniting a chain reaction, but the fantasy may take an unexpected turn. Symbolic convergence theory is both objective and interpretive. Objective because the theory's basic explanatory hypothesis, which is sharing group fantasies creates symbolic convergence, is framed as a universal principle that holds for all people in any culture at any time in any communication context. Interpretive since the methodology of determining fantasy themes, fantasy types, and rhetorical visions is rhetorical criticism, which is a humanistic approach. A good objective theory explains what occurs and why it happened. The concept of symbolic convergence can help us make sense of chaotic group discussions. A good objective theory predicts what's going to happen. SCT clearly predicts that when a fantasy train erupts among members, symbolic convergence will occur. A good interpretive theory clarifies people's values. There's no doubt that fantasy theme analysis uncovers the values of a rhetorical community. A good interpretive theory offers a new understanding of people. SCT's method of fantasy theme analysis does this exceptionally well by directing rhetorical critics to focus on symbolic language.